All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are diving in today on a happy occasion. Copilot, the AI tool from Microsoft, has a turn two. It was officially last month in February, actually, and we did celebrate, but we're recording this now to mark the occasion. I'm Caroline Henne, and I am joined here by Molly Yanus from Echolocity.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here. Thanks for joining.
Here's our agenda for today. We'll do some quick intros, talk about some helpful resources if you want to spend a little bit of time yourself diving into this, and then we'll really get into it with what's been happening with Copilot in the midst of the AI boom, and look at some specific use cases that we're finding to be really key things that Copilot can help you with. We'll also spend some time on the PM agents, which is like where we think a lot of AI stuff is going to be going next and be helpful for project management. And then if we have time, we'll get into some like tips and gotchas too. These pictures here on the right are when Molly and I went to the fun Microsoft community conference last year and got our t-shirts and everything. And that was a place we heard a ton about Copilot and really got the excitement and vision for where we think it's going. As I said, I'm Caroline. I am been a solution consultant with Echolocity since 2022. I've got experience with Microsoft, of course, but also a lot of the other project management tools that we use and help clients use, like Smartsheet and ClickUp and Teamwork. We choose a name when we work, or sort of a nickname when we started Echolocity, and mine is Insightful Analyst.
I call them personas, and mine came from like my very first job, Caroline, where people called me the question queen, and I think I still live up to that. I love working with clients and finding out more about what's going on with them, challenges, and framing up solutions. I'm a solution architect, and I'm actually the founder and CEO of Echolocity, Echo Consulting. We've been around for 6 years. It's crazy. And helped over 100 different clients with what we call work management solutions. So project, workflows, business process automation, all that jazz. And Microsoft being a leader in the digital workspace, we became a partner recently because they were putting a real investment behind their task management, project management, work management that we've been working with for the last 6 years. Again, we're more focused on that project management, PMO, portfolio kind of view, and with the new updates to Planner and things like that, that's when we really dove into to Microsoft more intentionally. I'm super pumped to talk about Copilot today because that's what they're leading with. But as Caroline mentioned, definitely looking at those PM agents as a personal interest as well.
I wanted to share some other resources just right off the bat and just encourage people to take a look at this if you would like to dive in more. This is a link to the Microsoft Learn Center. There are whole learning tracks and lots of documentation and certification paths directly related to Copilot. And I've done several of these. I have definitely found them to be helpful, so I can recommend those. I've also got the link here to the Microsoft Copilot blog, and this is really the best place to keep up with product updates and events around Copilot. They are doing a lot of AMA events or webinars about specific. I actually just signed up for one about Copilot pages, which is going to be something that's happening in Loop, but driven by Copilot, which is really interesting too. So that blog is definitely a good place to follow. You also, if you don't have access to it in another way right now through Microsoft, you can try Copilot Chat for free. This goes to the link that, you just put it in your browser, the URL, and give it a try to get sort of the experience of what it is like as far as sort of the chatbot experiences with Copilot. Microsoft Ignite is the flagship conference that really focuses on kind of the technical developments that are taking place, and Microsoft brings the big group together. Molly also put in the chat, because I forgot to add it to this slide, there is a community conference that is really user focused for Microsoft that we attended last year. It's going to be in Las Vegas this year, should be fun. But we can definitely recommend both of those, and they both also have some digital content available if you look at the conference while it's going on and then after the conference. And then finally, our Echolocity YouTube channel has a lot of Microsoft videos, has a lot of project management videos. And we love to get questions there, get, suggestions for further videos, but hopefully provide some quick, easy resources for walking through things like how to do stuff in Microsoft using Copilot.
And I'll just add one more. I love this resource list, Caroline, that you provided. I added a couple of links in there, the community conference that we attended last year, and there's definitely a Copilot Studio in version of that in May. But within the adoption, so you provided like the blog and some of the learning tracks and things like that. Probably one of my favorite resources is actually like the scenario library for Copilot. And that one you can really dig into, whether it's industry or whether it's like your department vertical and things like that. I find that super useful to contextualize Copilot. And I see that that's where Microsoft is going too with their AI agents and things like that, is really contextualizing them within either a business function like marketing versus sales versus customer service, as well as an industry vertical like construction versus education versus energy. So that's one way I like to think about it. If you're just kind of exploring Copilot and how it can be used and trying to develop that business case, that's one of my favorite resources to look at. Thanks for sharing, Caroline.
I wanted to do, just to situate us a little bit. We are obviously hearing about AI a ton. You've probably interacted with AI, whether you know it or not, like online all the time. It's being incorporated everywhere. But just kind of a look back for the last 10 years, this is obviously a very recent development that it has been so publicly available that people have been able to interact with it. AI has been in the works for many years, like scientists and computer scientists have been developing the models and that kind of thing, but it hasn't always been so publicly available, and certainly not so productized, like to the forefront of all the products that we're using. 2015, one of the first things that I found was interesting was I remember when deepfakes were starting to come about. It really started with AI voice cloning, like being able to intake all these different voice files and sound files and actually do, somewhat realistic versions of voices and then specific people's voices. That was in 2015. By the time we got to 2020, one of the first publicly available large language models was released by OpenAI, GPT-3. And then 2021 was starting to get those images generated by AI, where you could start to put in prompts and come up with some kind of image from an AI tool. ChatGPT, which we've probably all interacted with, was first publicly available in 2022. And we start to see the big players in the tech space really developing their own, following the popularity of ChatGPT and the clear impact of it. Google's Gemini came out in 2023, LLMA from Meta, and Microsoft 365 Copilot was first made available in 2023. Last year in 2024, what we really saw was Copilot from the Microsoft side starting to actually get integrated with the rest of the Microsoft environment. And suddenly you were starting to see the little icon to try Copilot here, or here's a trial there, in Teams, in your Office apps, in all these different places. From our perspective, which we work in project management software, basically all the time, we use lots of different tools. Last year was really the first time we saw it being integrated in some of the other big project management software that we use all the time, like Smartsheet, Airtable, Asana, like everyone's starting to incorporate it a little bit. And if you've tried it, it's sort of varying levels of sophistication of like how helpful it is and what it can actually do in each platform. As we are progressing in 2025, I think we just likely are just going to see that more and more. And so the skills of knowing how to use these AI tools effectively and efficiently really are going to become more and more important for project managers and program managers. Azure, at the very least, to be conversant about them and what they can do, but hopefully to be using them effectively to actually save you time and actually be, making your work easier.
So I think it's really interesting because Caroline's really represents the commercial availability of when like end users became aware of this. But I think about one of the first things that that I am aware of and or that previous generation was aware of when we started to understand like intelligence beyond just like the computer. Does everyone remember like Watson, IBM's Watson, like playing Jeopardy and playing like chess and things like that? Like that is, again, it wasn't commercially available, but that was when we started to like recognize it beyond just theory and everything like that. So when I was at the MIT conference like last year and talking about AI, they were talking about AI starting, more in the 1950s, right? And the expansion in 1960s and 70s more from a historical. But really, we didn't, as users, as individuals, become aware of it until much later, except for in the popular, pop culture Watson basis, at least for me.
So turning back to like Copilot specifically in Microsoft, the official blurb from Microsoft is your everyday productivity app for work and life. The last real significant change was as of January 15th, just a couple months ago. The Office app, what used to be this purple icon, is now being called the Microsoft 365 Copilot app across web, mobile, and Windows. And I actually noticed I recently got a new laptop. There is a Copilot key on my laptop, like a key on my keyboard that has the Copilot symbol on it on my laptop. So they are bringing it in, this is the PC, so they are really bringing it in and putting it at the forefront of sort of defining, almost redefining a little bit what they want people to think of with Microsoft Office. It's Copilot now. As we, just Molly sort of touched on it, but Copilot uses generative artificial intelligence, which a lot of the AI bots that we interact with, like essentially that is what they all do. It are using these models that can generatively create text, images, video, and other forms of data. They are trained on huge data sets, these what are called large language models. And all that input enables them to produce new data based on that input. Our experience of interacting with them is this chatbot experience where we ask a question and it gives an answer and then we can respond to that answer. But it's all built on these large language models. Natural language processing helps tools to understand and respond to human languages, to human language, and languages because they're often translating among languages. That's one of the key uses we're starting to see is better translations actually between languages, but also understanding the underlying meaning and context behind language, sentiment analysis, the mood and emotion behind text. And that's one of the things I've been impressed with so far interacting with Copilot is using something like a transcript from a meeting, being able to ask like a sentiment kind of based question, like or something that requires being able to understand enough context to give you a good answer, like, were there any disagreements during this meeting? How was this disagreement resolved? It can actually give you a good answer to that as long as it's got the transcript recorded and the question makes sense within the context of the meeting as far as what it's able to answer. But I've asked questions like that before of something that requires more than just listing out a bullet point summary of a meeting.
And I would think just like Copilot and AI in Microsoft in general, I just look at it in my experience with something like ChatGPT versus Copilot. Copilot tends to have more of my tone because it's pulling from that email and things like that. I can see it in its use of exclamation points because I use a lot of those. I can use that, right? Whereas if I'm going into the language model that is public facing, right, ChatGPT and the things like that, that's where people are saying like, oh, well, they always have the dash or they always have the icons and things like that. It's really interesting because Copilot is unique to the data set within your tenant in Microsoft, that it can be more aware of the context that the data that you own. So I think that's one of the key pieces that I like to highlight between Copilot and just other AI models.
Yeah. And that's exactly, the data set that Copilot's drawing on, just like Molly said, is your Microsoft Graph. So if you think of all of the data that is connected to your Microsoft tools and your apps and everything that you use, there's the organizational data that you're connecting to, there's the groups that you're a part of, your email, Teams files, all of this data is included in what's called the Microsoft Graph. And Microsoft is very keen to make it known that any prompts, responses, data from Microsoft Graph that you have access to are not used to train foundation LLMs. Like that data is not going out anywhere else. But it does enable it to produce, just like Molly said, something that's actually going to sound like you and eventually like react like you. Okay. A quick, we don't have to talk through every single one of these, but I just wanted to call out all of the Microsoft apps that Copilot is now incorporated with, or has something that it does. We've got all these sort of office apps that you are probably used to using and are starting to see that Copilot app pop up, or the prompt of whether you want to use Copilot to help with it. In Word, you can generate, edit, and summarize documents. It can produce charts and automate things in Excel, PowerPoint, produce slides. And Forms is actually the one I have used a few times the most successfully, I think. Create a prompt to create a particular kind of form or survey. It is available in Microsoft Stream as well. It's similar. I found it to be similar to how you might use it in a Teams meeting, like summarize content from a transcript, since it's just working off of videos and transcripts.
I've got a question on Stream, Caroline.
Yeah.
The last time I was in Stream using that, it was still limited by the recording. Like, so if multiple people were coming in from the same office, it's not able to differentiate yet between the different voices with the same kind of user that's logged in. But that's an area that we're hoping to see improvement on. And we have seen, some other tools and things like that that are able to distinguish between different voices in the room instead of just using logged in accounts. So I'll be curious to see what Microsoft does with that over time.
And that's also a very recent addition in Teams, is that you now say what language the meeting is in every time. We're getting that prompt every time. And that's for that same reason, to make sure that's identified for the transcript, for the AI processing eventually. So maybe there'll be a way to have people assign themselves when there's multiple people in a room or something like that. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Some of the other applications, some of your other like core applications within Microsoft, Teams will be one we'll look at a lot, because that's, as a project manager, a place you're going to be working out of a lot, and a place where it can be really useful, as well as Outlook. Loop, the kind of newer version of it's not just a notes-taking app, but that's one of the things that's really useful for, and it's a collaborative space, but Copilot is really integrated into Loop, and can be a place that you can use it very successfully. It is also available in OneNote. Loop and OneNote, folks are kind of, there's a chance that OneNote will be deprecated someday, I want to say. Like, we're encouraging people to think about Loop and start using it, because it is some of the same purposes people use it for. But for now, you still have both Loop and OneNote available to you. It generating ideas and content in Whiteboard, as well as Planner, which is the one we'll definitely spend a little bit of time on in a bit. And then finally, as we're getting into our more really heavy duty, more complex apps, there's a number of things that Copilot can be used for across OneDrive, SharePoint, Microsoft Lists, as well as your Power Platform apps.
So I think a huge thing, right, with Copilot is this movement, and it's been for a while, right, but this concept of citizen developers. What requires a technical coding resource? What requires a technical analyst that has training on specific tool sets? Can we make these tools that are very powerful for solving real business problems, right, accessible to tech, to people that don't have a big tech background? And so as I look at Power Apps, and compared to all the different tools out there that allow me to do, stand up quick applications, AI is a huge opportunity, and Copilot is a huge opportunity to put that very powerful tool set in the hands of people that are less technical. But usability, user experience, the ability to make this accessible and not intimidating is so important. And it'll be really interesting as Copilot continues to, be pushed to the forefront, how users experience Copilot as either a separate app or a function within apps. Because one of those things that we run into so much with Microsoft is this explosion of all these apps and all of them having interconnected and or overlapping functionality. How do you know which app to use, right? Similar concept with Copilot, but trying to not have Copilot just be a separate app, but really being integrated across all of these. What is that user experience? What does that training and adoption look like? And what is that business case that you're going to make for Copilot, because it is an additional license on top of the licensing that you're already having? So super pumped. I know it's been out 2 years, as you said. Happy birthday, Copilot. But so much change anticipated over the next year as well.
So some of our Copilot key uses, we won't spend a ton of time on this because it's the thing that's easiest for you to try. But you can use it for content generation and editing. You can draft an email in Outlook. If you haven't tried it, it's kind of fun. Go in your email. You can draft some content, change the tone, even make it like in the form of a poem. But that's right in your Outlook email that you have the option to do that. You can also create, for a project manager, what gets interesting is when I can just create some of the stuff that I normally would have to spend, some time doing, that there's not a huge value add that I'm able to do. It's just something that needs to be generated for a meeting, and Copilot can really help with that. One example I've got is just creating a meeting agenda in Loop using Copilot. So I've created a prompt here. This is a Loop page. We have several videos on how to use Loop. I've got a few more that are coming up soon, so stay tuned to the Echolocity channel. But just looking at a Loop page, if I open up a new page, again, with my Copilot license, I get prompted immediately if I would like to use Copilot for something. I developed this kind of detailed prompt of what I need. Build a meeting agenda for a client meeting to last an hour, including the goals, deliverables, and completion date. Use the information. I've already created a slide deck for it, so I can link to that slide deck for the information that Copilot will need to build the agenda, and then make sure it's in a table format with time allotments and give people time to ask questions at the end. So when I throw this into Copilot, it will create a draft, and of course I can give it suggestions to change some of the content as much as I need to, but it is able to very quickly, let's see, I could have the meeting should start at 11 a.m. And very easily, I can start to refine what I'm actually saying. So I get an agenda for my kickoff meeting. I have the times adjusted. It was able to pull all of this information just from the slide deck that I already created. And I could start adding a column for, the assigned person who will address that agenda item, that kind of thing. But the key piece here, and this is where this training and skills development starts coming in. This is a simple example, but part of why Copilot was able to do this was I had a pretty specific prompt. I didn't, you can start from something very general, but the more specific you can be, and this is something that I found you get better at as you keep interacting with Copilot, this sort of structure is going to give you a lot better results. So for this prompt, I started with a goal. I want to build a meeting agenda. I added context for a client meeting to last an hour. I ended up adding a little more context that the client meeting needs to start at 11. Specified the sources using the information from that specific file, but you could, it could be from anywhere else in your Microsoft environment that you've got information that Copilot can look for, and then set a few more detailed expectations about it being in a table format, adding the chance to let people ask questions at the end. So definitely keep this structure in mind as you're starting to interact with Copilot. for these situations where you're looking for something more specific, that you're not just trying to do a brainstorm, create an outline that's more general. And
I would just add on top of that, Caroline, right, which is as you get more familiar with this, initially, right, it's even knowing to prompt, like even knowing to try Copilot, right? So it's like, oh, hey, like, let me just even think to look at doing it in Copilot versus just doing it myself completely manually, right? So right now, as a project manager, you might copy and paste last week's instead and then start editing that. That might be the way that you currently do it, right? So it's like, hey, looking at last week, can you provided me a updated agenda or something along those lines? And then to Caroline's point, adding more details as you go. And then that's just for like a single prompt. Really, it is like doing the prompt, getting the results, and then having a judgment call in terms of adjusting the prompt and asking for it to redo its work, or just diving in and starting editing yourself. So it's kind of a progression between knowing to do it, then knowing what to put in the prompt, and then knowing how long to go with adjusting the prompt to get close enough results that you then want to go in and edit manually and put your stamp on and things like that. And just like anything that you're doing, there is this diminishing return, right? Like you don't need a perfect agenda. You need to have an agenda. You need it to be relevant. But we don't care necessarily if something's an extra 30 seconds or less, right? So I think that as Copilot and Microsoft continues to expand this functionality, it'll also be interesting at what point it becomes prescriptive instead of requiring a person to trigger it. So, for example, if I know that there's a meeting, right, does Caroline have to know to go in and ask it to create a agenda every single week if it's a weekly reoccurring meeting? Or is it going to learn that, oh, hey, like you've asked me for an agenda the last 2 weeks, like, do you want me to set you up with an agenda every single time, right? And then I don't have to go through that step. So it'll be interesting to what point and what functionality we will have as, managers of our tenant within Microsoft to say, if there's a meeting, always set up a loop for it, always set up an agenda for it, always send this out, versus requiring a project manager or a person to go and expect that. So Caroline and I experienced that even within the meeting where it's like, all right, we had a webinar, we need to push record. Well, that's a manual action to push record. And if you forget, then you're out of luck, right? At what point is there going to be a ability to say all meetings that are webinars will always be recorded and you actually have to unselect it instead of select it? So it'll be curious, like we have some of that functionality now that we can set up, but at what point is Copilot and or AI going to be involved in that piece of it? All right.
And I think
you,
that turning point is where this agents idea really comes in. And I think we're going to see that's where we're going to be seeing that turn into being more proactive and able to do more stuff. Yep. Another key use, I'm not going to demo, it's another thing that's easy to try for yourself, but within Teams, you can actually do, sort of these productivity support things, summarize my meetings and indicate the action items. If you haven't, let me just pull up what it looks like within Teams. This is referring specifically to this Copilot app within Teams, where the summary of my meetings from yesterday, along with the list of action items, it's got the links to exactly when each of those meetings was, and so on.
And Caroline, I'm just going to I just said summarize meetings so far for this meeting, just as an example, and I'll just put it in the chat so everyone can see what Copilot has provided for a meeting review so far in this meeting itself. You can keep going.
It's funny that it didn't get your name spelled right in one of our meetings either. Like when it's doing like the transcript versus the actual names from the meeting. So another one, and this would be a whole set of training and everything on itself, but the Power Platform is a good example of that citizen developer idea, or getting to more low code, how do you make these developer tools available to folks that aren't actually developers? a real quick example within Power Apps. This is the new Power Apps experience too, if you haven't tried it. But you can start with a very simple prompt now of like, my organization needs a project intake tool. And this is it always gives you that hint of this is the AI generated suggestion, just so you know. But the AI is now going to start walking you through these steps to start building an app for this exact thing. It hasn't built an app yet. It's actually starting way back here of like, okay, you've identified a business problem. The next thing that you should do is start to define the roles of who's using this business problem. And you can start walking through the steps of defining those things out in order to actually build an app, which is interesting. It still requires, obviously it's not, it still requires a lot of input from you. You'll be interacting with it, but it's giving you that sort of first step into that creation, what is necessary to do something more complex, like create a whole app. Some of this is available now in Teams as well. And is, again, worth looking at within Teams if you haven't tried to explore it yourself.
So I think one of the interesting pieces here is the Copilot prompt library. So in the chat earlier, I was talking about Promptathon and training people on how to do prompts. Well, Copilot and Microsoft have actually provided us with prompt libraries. And so the one that I just sent in was actually just for the Office suite. So it'll have things like Word and Forms and PowerPoint, things like that. But there's a prompt library as well for, I believe, both Power Apps and Power Automate, for example. But what I'm going to be really interested in is as employers are able to include prompts, right? So if you think about it within a meeting, Caroline, right now we have recap meetings so far and action items and things like that. Well, actually employers and or teams, right, or like leaders being able to say what those prompt options are and have that mirror the business process. So I'm curious to see kind of how prompt libraries and how prompt configuration, everything like that will happen. And again, leading into our next piece of the conversation, which is agents.
So our example for getting into this agent idea is really starting from Planner, which is another app that Microsoft is really sort of forefronting right now. They've done a lot of good work on it, and they've really prioritized incorporating Copilot into it. So when I look at Planner, there's sort of the initial way you can use the AI tool, which is create a new project plan. I'm a project manager. I need a new project plan. I can plan with Project Manager. The example I can use is software feature development, because that's one I kind of know and rattle off more quickly. I'll add it to my Microsoft group. And create the plan. This is also this new capability within Planner is very recent. This may be just since January. I've only been using it since about January. But it's a similar idea of what we were just looking at. You start with sharing your goal. And for development, I'll keep it general just so we don't get. And the button I just pushed was to, if this is my goal, generate tasks for me. What it is, it's, gives you these messages. This is going to be a more similar where it's going to spit out sort of some suggested tasks. You have the option to respond, add details, start actually assigning them to people. And when I look at something like, I have produced a a basic, that's a little too basic. And that's another one. I'll look at this one anyway. But what we would typically want to see would be, are we hitting all of these tasks that we know we're going to have for our typical software development? And how are we going to order and prioritize them? How do we start putting dates on them? So we can take a look at how well it did. So it's not too many tasks in here yet. And it's partly because I just didn't give it very much of a prompt. It wasn't a lot of guidance to start. But we could absolutely use this as a starting point, assign them out. And this is the place where we get this agent idea. I can certainly assign something, to Molly, but I also could assign these projects to the assign these tasks to the project manager agent. And it is going to actually start working on the task. When I look at this view of what's going on, I've assigned them all. It's going to queue them up. And spoiler, it's not going to actually do any of these tasks yet. It's going to produce a list of questions and plans of the information that it needs to actually complete these tasks. So I wouldn't say it's the full, project manager agent yet, because it's not, even if the task is fairly straightforward. So like when I look at this, the task was to conduct market research to identify user needs. Great. Well, what it did was, it's obviously not actually going out and doing research anywhere, but it's giving you the steps that would need to happen in order for market research to be conducted. Even a simpler task like, let me come back.
Communication plan.
Grid view, yeah. Like develop a project timeline and milestones. Let's see how far along it is on this. And it will start moving things if it's something that it feels like it needs further input. I tested one where it actually said, schedule a kickoff meeting. It is not actually connected to Outlook and going to schedule a kickoff meeting yet. It will do the same thing. It will spit out a plan or spit out a list of steps for you to schedule a meeting. So you can see it is working on things, but I wouldn't call it a full it's not doing the thing yet. It's not actually accomplishing the task yet, although I believe that's where Microsoft is trying to get it to go.
If it consistently sees a template with a communication plan across multiple different projects, and it can look and say, and you can assign it to a communication plan, it's going to learn from that and get you further and further and further along. What's interesting to me too is how much information it's pulling from outside, right, versus from inside. And so a lot of this information isn't in a SOP within the Echo tenant, right? So it is pulling information and knowledge outside about best practices in addition to that. And so what we're going to continue to see as well is the ability of a tenant owner as a person that manages like a global administrator within the Microsoft environment to be able to say what it can pull from where. So I think intellectual property and things like that and permissioning and governance and things like that will all be things that will continue to play out, both in the public sector and private sector, and understanding as a society where we consider ownership of information to lie and experience and hive knowledge to lie. So this is really helpful for me. I haven't seen this recently, Caroline, but for Agent, I've seen like one of their quick demo videos, but I'd love to do another session on agents because I do think that that's an area, especially for project managers and managers that have repeatable tasks that can't be delegated necessarily to someone because of privileged information in some cases. I think it'll be really interesting to see how agents come into play.
Yep. And this is an image from the Microsoft Copilot blog of some use cases that they see being able to develop as this improves and you're interacting with it. And just like Molly said, it's getting better and better information about what is needed for particular tasks. Oh, I must have left out the gotchas slide. Sorry. So this is my Q&A slide if there were any questions. I would say some of the gotchas that we've noticed so far are the main one we've sort of said is that none of this is going to be super useful without you also developing the skill to use the AI tools. You do need to start working on the idea of how to do prompts. Try the different pieces and start giving it the more specific information. It's not a, fix everything button by any means. The other thing that we see is The concern, although Microsoft has a very bounded, data that your information, your prompts, your everything are not going to be shared outside of your tenant, it does raise questions essentially about intellectual property, IP. How much do you, in a sense, take credit for, or how much do you put out as, something that was produced with the help of AI? Is that truly, your work? And these are all questions that are being debated. We don't have the exact answer on any of it, but I don't know if you want to give your take on that, Molly. You had a good summary of like how much it makes sense to use AI and still put it out as like original work or IP from an organization.
Well, as an employer, right, like we are on the spot to come up with what our AI policy is. And honestly, as an employer, I'm being put on the spot about that for, from our business insurance standpoint and from our clients in terms of who owns the product and what AI is being used because there's security policies in other companies for AI. So we're really on the cusp of trying to understand what is allowed and what is not allowed. And I don't think that we have come to an agreement on that as a society yet, let alone the legality aspects that need to kind of catch up to that. So I would definitely say, like from a news standpoint, environmental impact is something that is, in underway, right? There's cybersecurity aspect of it. There was a really significant release in China compared to some of the ones in the US, and I think there's some aspects of that in the macroeconomic and political sphere, intellectual property. And I'm trying to come up with the right analogy. I love analogies, Caroline, but I just think about it if I crocheted or I knit, right? I'm an artist because I'm using this yarn to build something new. But there's artisans that make yarn and have it handmade and have it absolutely gorgeous with like all these different so I think it's interesting as we look at layering different pieces on top of it, right? Like what part is owned by me versus another artisan versus someone else. If I think about it from a baker perspective, right? Like someone that does artisan butter or in their sourdough or something like that. So it's just, it'll be interesting. Internally at Echo, just talking about like, all right, so if I put in one prompt versus if I prompt it 13 different times with all of this different context and give it the data set I want it to look at, and then I still have to edit it, like, is that mine? Or should I be saying, hey, I used this specific tool to help with that? And so learning just what is expected as a society, what we as individuals think, I think is a really important question. And I don't think there's an answer. It's going to be a conversation we need to have. But it's an exciting conversation for sure. And I really appreciate, Caroline, you putting this deck together and giving our audience some of what's really cool coming out in Copilot. And I'd love to see a little bit more on the agent stuff and the project management stuff, especially over the next few months. So thank you for your time. Don't hesitate to reach out, guys. Like, we love to talk. We love to ask questions. We are a Microsoft partner, and we do have services and trainings and things like that to help with organizations that are trying to get the most out of their Microsoft investment and trying to get the right tools in the right people's hands to really maximize clarity and productivity and efficiency and honestly reduce burnout of their team and improve the digital experience of their workforce. So that's what we love to play with, finding your flow. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you think that this webinar was useful and we might be able to help you on your journey and your team's journey.
Great way to end. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.